So I want you to take a look at the two brains that you see up here. These are images of brains from a healthy development and an abused brain. Remember, we're talking about trauma that happens while the brain is still developing. It's completely different than trauma that happens once the brain is fully developed. If you look here, you're going to notice some things. Now keep in mind that red means a lot of activity is happening. And places where it's dark, you're going to see not much activities happening at all. You see a lot more activity going on in the temporal lobe area of the healthy developing brain. In the abused brain, you notice this area is much darker. There's not a lot of activity happening. What is the temporal part of your brain used for? This is where you hold your cognition. This is where we have executive functioning. This is where we have those self-regulation skills. The abused brain has not developed that at a time that they probably should have. What's also interesting is you'll notice that while you might think the healthy developing brain has more activity in all parts of it, you're going to notice that the abused brain is actually more active in this area back here. Does anyone know what that part of the brain is responsible for? That's your limbic system. That's that part of your brain that is responsible for your fight or flight. All right, if you take a look at the chart up here, you're going to notice that we're going to compare the stages of typical development of a person compared to a person who's experienced developmental trauma. We expect that a typical human, when born, spends a little bit of time in survival. This is infancy to about 2 or 3 years old. This is when a child is first born and they have those survival instincts, right? If you put your finger in a baby's hand, they grab it. If you put something up to a baby's mouth, they're going to suck it. That's how they can eat and know to do that. No one has to teach them. But we expect this to be the smallest amount of time in a human's development. We then expect them to go into regulation. I like to call this the three-nagers. This is when they're learning to make friends, they're learning to play, they're starting to regulate themselves. A little bit longer of a time span in their life than survival mode, but still not a huge amount of time. In fact, by the time we usually get them in schools, they should be moving into social emotional. Right? This is your elementary into your middle school, sometimes even high school years. And then the last stage that we hope most adults get to, and we hope they stay in, is cognition. This is when all those synapses have finally formed in your brain and you're able to make good decisions. But let's look at what happens to a child who's experienced developmental trauma. You'll notice that they spend a lot more time in survival. The reason they do is because things are happening in their life that forces that center of their brain to have to work itself harder, almost like a muscle. It's overdeveloped. And every time they try to get to regulation or they try to get to social emotional, if something happens in their life that forces them back to survival, if they're hungry, if they're tired, if they're in danger, they are not going to be able to get to the stages they need to get to at the right time period.